Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to, of course, another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 85. Now, this week's pick, well, since October 3rd, the classic debut album from Diamond Head titled Lightning to the Nations, or sometimes also referred to as the White Album, well, it had hit its 40th anniversary. So eventually I had to at least, spotlight this album anyways, since given how monumental this album was definitely seen as, especially when it came to, of course, at this point still, the burning new wave of British heavy metal movement. Of course, this album in general pretty much went on to influence countless of bands. I mean, without any other mention of Metallica, of course, even to an extent as well, Megadeth and Exodus, I think, are definitely two of the other bands that you definitely can see the influence. I mean, of course, Dave Mustaine of Megadeth, I mean, being one of the original members of Metallica, I mean, Lars's influence had to at least rubbed at least a bit into, of course, Dave Mustaine's musical playing. And of course, even when it comes to at least Exodus, you can't also at least deny the fact that at the time that I think when Exodus had formed, they were just, again, it was more so influenced from the likes of just Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and that. Then, of course, hearing Metallica play and hearing them, covering some of the classic Diamond Head tracks, you can't also then at least think and go that some of that performance from Metallica of them covering that stuff had to at least somewhat rubbed a little bit into Exodus's writing. So, I mean, listen to some of the riffs too, and then there were none or no love as well. I mean, listen to some of those riffs and tell me you can't hear at least Am I Evil at least in those songs. Because the riffing of Am I Evil, it definitely was like laying the blueprint for, of course, a lot of the thrash metal bands and that whole thrash metal sound. It kind of laid in that blueprint into there. I mean, first it was Symptom of the Universe from Black Sabbath, and then finally it was Diamond Head pretty much expanded on that with, of course, Am I Evil. So You can't definitely deny the fact that of Metallica playing or covering some of these songs, that it definitely helped inspire just even more bands. And so in many ways, while it may have been just Metallica covering Diamond Head, still it's Diamond Head's blueprint. It's still Diamond Head's writing. It's still, it's still their mark. Therefore, Diamond Head, in many ways, has influenced quite a bit of the thrash metal movement. Just that, it just seems to have definitely come off for it to some extent with Am I Evil. And of course, it'll be apparent in some of the other songs on this album, like The Prince or Helpless, for definitely examples. So definitely definitely some of the biggest examples in this album is definitely seen as definitely one of the most immortal albums, one of the most immortal pieces, part of the new wave or British heavy metal movement. I mean, alongside with Iron Maiden, alongside even at times early Def Leppard, alongside Tigers of Pantang and Raven and Saxon. Definitely alongside those kind of bands, even to extent as well, Samson. So the Diamond Head along with all these bands, they definitely inspired that whole generation of metal that came out in the mid to late 80s. So definitely it is very much deserving of being at least presented on this channel. So here, without further ado, let's definitely start talking about a bit of the stuff that Lightning to the Nations definitely had to offer on this album. I mean, I don't know if anyone really wanted to hear a review, but I'm going to try and give you one. Because again, definitely we have to take a look back at this album and some of the classics that this album definitely contained and unleashed upon that whole world and so on. And I'm also going to try and touch on even a bit of the different pressings, and which also holds some artwork and so on. I'm going to do every bit that I can. I'm going to try and give you the whole fucking package. So without further ado, let's definitely start looking at Diamond Head's Lightning to the Nations. But before that, I mean, they had some 7 inches before this. I mean, they were formed in 1976, but again, prior to this, they had some 7 inches. I think mostly were self-released, but this was many ways this was their debut full-length album, and it was originally just self-released. No label, no nothing, and the artwork was just plain white. The record label was just plain white. The whole thing was white. Therefore, it got the name of the White Album. But I think in many ways, it was supposed to have been called Lightning to the Nations anyways. But that ended up being at least, would have been more, it would have all came to fruition in, of course, on the Happy Face Records repress, which was also ran apparently by Diamond Head themselves. That was their own label, which is kind of strange, given that there was a few more bands that was on Happy Face Records, but I guess in many ways they had some bands under their belt. I guess in many ways that definitely is one of the main reasons why Diamond Head got compared to Led Zeppelin, because Led Zeppelin had Swan Song, and they had plenty of different bands under their belt too on that label. So I guess Diamond Head kind of followed in those footsteps, but they're the DIY version of that. Happy Face Records was the DIY version of Swan Song. Okay, so the minute that they re-released it on Happy Face Records, it was still plain white, but the label itself on the record this time wasn't just plain white. It had at least a logo, at least one of the earliest logos for Diamond Head, and of course bared the title of Lightning to the Nations. So that's why I always kind of thought that they always wanted it called Lightning to the Nations, but the money. They probably didn't have enough money to really print up at least a decent label. I don't know. You would have thought, but with all the copies they sold of the White Album, that they had enough to probably print up at least on the second independent pressing, but I guess that didn't happen. I guess in many ways this is the Happy Face Records is the second independent pressing, but I guess according to Discogs that isn't really true. It's weird when you're trying to look up information, you get something different than you think you think, but then you really then start looking, it's like, oh wait a minute, that's a little different. Yeah. The world of the internet for you all. It's the world of the internet. So without further ado, Lightning to the Nations, it all boiled up to this album after releasing at least some of their 7 inches and so on. Finally, we get this album. And there was a few more 7 inches and a few different EPs and so on that came after this as well. But this was their debut full-length album. So Lightning to the Nations. This, of course, pretty much contained about 7 songs, and it all clocked in at 41 minutes and 21 seconds. And the songs are, of course, Lightning to the Nations, The Prince, Sucking My Love, Am I Evil, Sweet and Innocent, It's Electric, and Helpless. And, I mean, when you look at some of the titles, it's almost kind of crazy. But now look at it. This is almost pretty much, you might as well call a greatest hits package. Because there's at least, all these songs has been at least been played by either Metallica, or you've at least heard it at some point. At this point, these songs have been so much embedded in every metalhead's or hard rocker's brain, that at this point, every one of these songs is so recognizable. If one of these radio hosts was ever to play on any of the radio stations, you probably at this point would recognize who the hell it is. It's just very much, and it's all iconic sounding at this point. They're almost even close to even being anthems. I mean, Lightning to the Nations and Am I Evil are pretty much, and It's Electric and Helpless are like fucking anthems to, of course, a lot of metalheads at this point. They are pretty much, they're just metalheads' anthems, especially during the whole new wave or British heavy metal movement. This was pretty much anthems for those for those guys, for those audience. It was all anthems. It turned into that. Again, along with the first Iron Maiden album, this album definitely contained quite a bit of anthems on this one, so I probably have spammed that word a few times. So, I mean, what else is also there to tell me? Lightning to the Nations is a classic fucking opener, one of my absolute favorite songs. The first time I ever heard Diamond Head was, my brother, who was definitely the one starting to dig into more of a Diamond, at least into more of Metallica's past, since he's such a huge, or at that point he was definitely a huge Metallica fan, that he definitely tried to dig into more of the past and finding all the cover tracks, and then wanted to try and listen to the originals. And that's how it came to at least me getting into these guys, was because of just him playing the stuff for me. And the first, I mean, just from the opening stuff from Lightning to the Nations, I was like, fuck, this is great. And I pretty much wanted to listen to the whole freaking album. And I love this whole album ever since. It's pretty much just one of my absolute favorites. I mean, this album, along with Merciful Fate's Melissa, were definitely two of the albums that definitely kind of played a big part in me discovering more of the more underground cult metal favorites, especially also more of the, more of, again, the new wave of British heavy metal bands, and just other bands in that category. I definitely started wanting to search for more bands in that light. That's how I found Tigers of Pantheon. That's how I found out in some ways of even other bands like Exciter, Saxon. I started getting more heavily Saxon after being so heavily into, Diamond Head and Merciful Fate, and of course then getting into Samson, and the rest is history. I just started getting into more of those kind of bands. So so in many ways, Diamond Head and Melissa, they definitely, though these two albums right here, they definitely sure played a big part in that, and that's why I said I really hold these, why I cherish these albums in general. But again, such a great opener, and of course it followed up by, of course, The Prince, which is again another fucking classic track. This is a straight up rocker. I mean, it starts off fast, but then it's again, this song has so many riffs in it that the riffs in this song could have almost, if you were to take at least to kind of time out the different riffs, that was enough probably to make 3 or 4 songs out of just from the riffs in this track. Just tons of riffs in this one. And then, of course, it's no different when, of course, the follow-up track, Stuck in My Love, which is the longest song on the album. This clocks in at 9 minutes and 32 seconds. I mean, this one, of course, starts out kind of, but it's just heavy. But it's also at times some almost some proggy stuff going on in this track too. It's got a progressive feel, but not to the point to where it's too progressive, but just has that proggy feel. Almost again like early Merciful Fate at times, or at least just Merciful Fate in general. It just has that going on for it. But goddamn, that's just more from the different riffs and the atmosphere of the song, and the way that it has that middle break where it just slows down, and you have, of course, again, Sean Harris and his voice, and he's just, I guess you can tell they definitely were heavily influenced by Led Zeppelin. But they pull it off. But I think the Zeppelin influences on this sound are pulled off in their own way, and it comes off, I think, very original. Then I would say that some of the stuff that, I mean, you can't tell me that if you were to go and listen to "Suck in My Love" and not tell me that they weren't at least influenced by Led Zeppelin, or at least any of those kind of early British rock bands. You can't tell me, because this one definitely has probably the biggest Zeppelin influence is actually on this track for me. So it's definitely also, it's definitely a good highlight for sure. I mean, most of the riffs on here were definitely probably also were at times even inspired by Achilles' Last Stand. I mean, that was probably one of the more rocking and more heavier numbers, at least from Led Zeppelin, at least by that point when they had released Presence. And of course, in many ways, it definitely inspired a lot of the other new wave or British heavy metal bands. But you go back and listen to that track, then listen to some of the stuff that Diamond Head was doing on this album, you can't tell me that they weren't at least influenced by that. So, and it's definitely apparent on tracks like this, or The Prince, or even Helpless. So definitely, it just has that great track. It's definitely one of the to me, it's one of the highlights for me of this album. I mean, the whole album itself is a fucking highlight, but "Suckin' My Love" is definitely one of the bigger highlights of it. Definitely, to me, one of the best tracks off this album in general. Then, of course, after it, it's of course, "Am I Evil?" Definitely, at this point, it is probably Diamond Head's most iconic track, just by the fact that Metallica has covered it, and the fact that it's been at this point even played in one of Rob Zombie's films. Actually, it was his remake of Halloween 2. It appears in that. It even appeared with one of the. It's actually one of the opening songs, I think, in the start menu for, of course, Brutal Legend. This is definitely by far one of Diamond Head's biggest songs. Is "Am I Evil?" Now, of course, it was such big that they also decided to re-record this along with Lightning to the Nations on the follow-up album, Borrowed Time. And some that might have been overkill, but the thing is, it's a heavy track. Again, I've already stated that this song right here pretty much inspired a lot of the thrash metal bands for sure. But it's just a heavy riff. It's a classic track, and that there's not a note of the song that I don't like. Every bit of it it's just another great riff after another great riff. Just a classic track in general, so I don't really have to talk too much about "Am I Evil?" Next up is "Sweet and Innocent." This, I guess you almost could say, is probably close to being filler material, maybe, on the album. Because it's definitely more, I mean, it's definitely typical of the new wave or British heavy metal movement. It's got that sleazy feel to it, and or glammy, sleazy feel that you would kind of expect it from those kind of bands. Like, I don't know, it's definitely a more better written track than, I'd say, like Big T's or from Saxon. But even as filler material, this is still a great track. It's just that compared to, of course, getting bombarded by the opener of Lightning to the Nations, to, of course, The Prince, "Suckin' My Love," and "Am I Evil?" It just, and of course, this also then being sandwiched between It's Electric and Helpless. It definitely seems to be the most less written track of the album. But even in its own right, this is still a great freaking track, and I still enjoy it. So it's really far from being a bad track in itself. Of course, next up, of course, is It's Electric. Which, again, it's a fun rocker. This song just rocks from beginning to end. I do have to kind of point that, given that this year that Diamond Head are doing a re-recorded version of Lightning to the Nations with this current lineup, which I'm not too thrilled about. And the first thing they had released of at least off this re-recorded version of Lightning to the Nations was It's Electric. And while I appreciate it, I don't think it does much for me. I think them doing re-recording Lightning to the Nations, I think, feels a little bit unnecessary. But I think there's some reasons behind it. Probably because of the fact that they probably don't have much rights to it, and trying to gain the rights from at least from Universal / against Sanctuary Records. They try and get rights from. It's like probably trying to. You might as well be fighting a bear, and you're not going to come out on top. So I guess so. In many ways, I get why bands might have to do that, because again, they don't always have legally rights to their own material. So I think it's a shame, but I kind of get it. But the thing is, the biggest takeaway from that video is it's in the description, where guitar player Brian Tatler, he actually goes and talks about how the song itself was basically inspired by AC/DC. It was his take a bit on the sort of AC/DC structuring, but again, a little different. Because the thing is, there were mostly, he kind of talked about how there were usually were holes, at least in their song structuring. And so he kind of wanted to fill up some of those holes, and that's kind of what came into It's Electric, which was them just filling up most of the empty spots in a lot of their, because AC/DC had their own standard style of structuring their own songs. And some of it, again, it usually had that sort of, I think if you kind of might get what's being talked about anyways, on what he's at least mentioning when talk about how there are some holes in a bit of their structuring. That's because I get those empty spaces, and he wanted to kind of fill out some of that. Still though, it turned into that definitely one of the more classic tracks, and that's when he also went into that, speaking of AC/DC, they actually had opened up for AC/DC on the Highway to Hell tour, which was at least in the early 80s, just around the time that I think before Bond's late passing. But the biggest memory that he had, at least of that, was while they were playing, he noticed that Bon Scott was actually standing at least on at least the end of the stage there on the side there, actually watching Diamond Head play, which to him was kind of one of the most coolest moments in his career, to see the legendary Bon Scott actually watching just these young guys just kicking ass on the stage in front of them. And to me, it was a moment, I guess, in many ways, he's never forgotten. I think that's so fucking cool, actually. That actually know just to see such an iconic face such as Bon Scott actually see you play, I think that right there is some big kudos. That definitely kind of told you a little bit about Bon Scott and his whole personality. At this point he was starting to do stuff with other bands as well, like Trust, and even at times stuff with Accept. I'm a Rebel, actually, during the rehearsals for that song. He apparently was at the rehearsals, seeing them at least coming up with that track or playing it. So that it definitely told you what he was definitely thinking of the growing, the heavy metal, newer hard rock stuff at that time. So that was definitely a cool moment, and the fact that it came out of just It's Electric. It's actually it's definitely a cool moment. Definitely a great track off the album. One of my absolute favorites. Of course, finally the album ends, of course, with, well, Helpless. One of my absolute favorite songs off this album. This one right here also definitely defines that new wave or British heavy metal style structuring. The whole sound. This is pretty much what the whole new wave or British heavy metal movement was built on. It is just this structuring, the pacing of this track. It's just a classic song in general, and it definitely ends the album on a high note. So it's definitely one of the most classic songs and ends a classic album that in many ways is definitely seen as an immortal piece of the new wave or British heavy metal movement. So yes, after this, again, this album definitely has definitely been over time. People who have definitely discovered it, whether it been due to Metallica and so on, they definitely, for sure, they definitely cherish this album to the very end. Ever since, of course, discovering it, it became for a lot of people one of the greatest discoveries of all time. So it's definitely a classic record in its own right. And as far as I've also finally to kind of touch on it, since then this album has been given so many reissues. The second reissue was, of course, was on the band's own new label, Happy Face Records. I think they had various few labels as well, but I think Happy Face is the one they are most remembered for. That was their label, and they had reissued on there, and that's where everyone kind of got the why. The title of the album, anyways, was Lightning to the Nations, was on the Happy Face Records pressing. And of course, then Wolf Records, I believe out of France, or was it Canada? I think Wolf Records were out of France, I believe. Germany. Wolf Records are actually our German label, excuse me there. Of course, when they re-released the album, the artwork, they changed the artwork a bit. It's now, instead of being white, it's now actual artwork. But it's pretty much, I think, the could be the German map, or just at least one of the maps. At least it's, again, it's pretty much depicting a map that's just being set on fire. Therefore, lightning to the nations. So they basically took their whole their spin on the title and made something out of that. So that was the first artwork for the album, for that pressing. Then, of course, in 1993/94, Metal Blade Records reissued the album. Apparently, I've heard with a different mix than the earlier mix. It was a different mix. I mean, this time has been also remixed, mostly due to the fact that for a long time, nobody could ever find the original masters for the album. So basically, they had to, at least in some ways, I think all they did was they found the mixes, and they just went and were able to kind of do different remixes. That's why you either had like Behold the Beginning or Am I Evil, which contained different mixes of stuff off the album, or were just the full record being remixed. And well, this version, the Metal Blade version, was remixed. And of course, it featured a different artwork. This time, it's just a plain black background, but with a diamond that's colored in a very light blue and stuff, with, of course, the Diamond Head logo and the title. So that was was the third cover for the third artwork for the album. And of course, then in 2011, Universal Music Group ended up reissuing the album again, and apparently this time with the original masters, which apparently was courtesy of, well, your old buddy Lars Ulrich. Yes, Lars Ulrich, of course, apparently found the original masters for the album and actually handed it out to, of course, Universal Music Group for the, at least, or any of their fucking masters or so over at Universal Music Group to remaster the album from the original master tapes. And basically that's where we got the other reissue of Lightning to the Nations. And it was, again, in 2011. It had a different artwork. This time, even different artwork. And this time, it took some inspiration from, I guess, both artworks for at least the Wolf Records pressing and the Metal Blade pressing, but even went more far and beyond this time, even more fantasy level. I mean, it pretty much depicts the Earth being struck by lightning. And that's kind of, again, black background, the Earth getting struck by lightning, and of course the very shiny Diamond Head logo, and then the title. So that was I guess for a while there, the last pressing until High Roller decided to repress it, this time with the original white cover, with, of course, with the signed signatures from the band members on the album. So there you go. There you have it. Lightning to the Nations. Again, hit its 40th anniversary. For those who grew up with listening to this album, definitely, again, give me your thoughts on your memories of first hearing this album. And especially at the time, if you were there when it first came out, when it was part of when it was the White Album, or at times when it was also being repressed under Happy Face Records. If you were there, definitely let me know what were your thoughts of that whole moment. But for those who haven't listened to this album, well, if you're getting into the new wave or British heavy metal movement, this is probably a no-brainer to get into. This is one of those albums, it's a no-brainer, to go listen to. So, there. That's all I have to say. Again, if you haven't heard this, I would just say go and listen to it. It's definitely a historic album in its own right. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. This ever Thrash Sam out. I hope you all enjoyed. Take care, everyone.